And last month, the DOE, the Department of Energy, announced a second tranche of funding for the GRIP programs, totaling $3.9 billion. The deadline for the application or the concept paper is January 12th. So, Anthony, if you're a utility that has already received an award, or you contemplate receiving an award in this second round, what is the first thing that you should be thinking about?
Well, in regards to the award, you should know the rules and regulations associated with that. With any, federal grant, you need to understand any of the codified regulations. You need to understand the scope, the intent of why the grant was awarded. And then you also need to be respectful of the fact that, there could be auditing that takes place, and make sure that you have processes in place to support all that. Again, these grants are given for the purpose of advancing the industry. And, anybody who, issues that grant is going to have an interest in making sure what you do with it, and also the feedback you provide to be able to help other utilities throughout the U.S.
Thank you. And for utilities, reliability has always been the watchword. And now we're hearing so much more about resiliency. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, reliability was what we focused on, but anymore what's really occurring when you take a look at some of the large storms. You were in New Jersey, Superstorm Sandy, and some of the large storms that have hit the U.S. The fact is there's been a lot of conversation in regards to, is there opportunities to make these systems, the grid, more resilient so that you're not coming back and rebuilding it time after time after time. So there is a great focus, and it's a great interest for the utilities, simply because of the manpower issues, the resource issues, the material, the fact more resilient you keep the lights on and you help communities get back to normal. Many utilities have focused on resiliency. Other utilities have looked at them and realized that they have cut back the restoration time to where it's much more manageable. And again, it's all about recovering those communities, and those communities can then get back to normal operation, and people can restore their lives.
It's certainly with one of the goals being greater resiliency. The government with these programs seems to be really fostering collaboration or partnerships. If you're a utility, what kind of steps do you take to find the right partner?
Well, when you take a look at the interdependency and the different sectors, and the fact that, again, this is, about those communities, I would be out there looking for those partnerships. Do you have an opportunity to develop some type of a resiliency project that you're requesting funds for, but then partnering with somebody so it's not just the utility benefiting, it dovetails with another sector? I've read in the past one utility that did such a grant with a hospital, and that together what they did is that the hospital, through the resiliency, we're able to keep the lights on. And what did that do? It's a cascading impact. The fact is that if the lights stay on in the hospital and you don't have to evacuate it, now you're not tying up ambulances. Now those ambulances can serve the public, and so on and so on. So if there's any advice that could be given, it would be look for those partnerships in your sector, outside of your sector, with a focus on what is this grant going to do to make the utility, but also the community, more resilient.
And it's certainly the Department of Energy would be very happy to hear you say that,
Thank you.
with its focus on the community benefiting. And actually, if you were, in your experience, in terms of the Department of Energy, what would be some of the pitfalls in terms of working with the agency that our participants could avoid?
Well, project drift is always a concern. So you filed, you've applied, you've been awarded the grant, but you were given that grant for a specific reason, a specific project. not allowing it to drift outside of that. Again, the Department of Energy has a great interest in, providing these grants so that you can learn from it. But, they want you to stay within the swim lane of what was identified. With any grants, I have seen that project drift where the intention is, A, B, and C, but then it drifts outside of it. Just make sure that you're managing it, that program, so that does not occur. That way, the monies that were given to you as the grant, you can sit back, you can look at the impact, the results as identified, and not allowing it to go astray.
And given the kind of results that DOE is looking for and the nature of some of these projects, what do you see in terms of the utilities industry going forward?
I think there's going to be a combination of new types of hardware. I think that technologies that are advancing out there are absolutely incredible. I look back and keep up on some of the technologies that's being introduced. I wish that some of that technology was available prior to me retiring, because quite frankly, I think that it's very dynamic and certainly makes a very robust distribution transmission system. But again, this is just another example, because again, the feedback from these DOE grants is going to help advance that technology, advance that hardware. And when you can do that, the end result is that with a resilient system, storm hits, you're not going to take, typically 5, 6, 7 days to restore. You may be able to cut it back down by a couple of days. And we all know that, again, if you can cut that restoration down, what happens? Communities then come to life. People can, with so many, businesses being run out of homes, they can get their businesses up and running, and people can just get back to a normalcy.
All right, Anthony, did you have any other thoughts for us today?
No, I think this is a great opportunity. I've been watching this, and I really applaud Department of Energy for what they're doing. I have just, again, if there's one thing, anybody who's looking at these grants, one, find those partners that really bring the most value to the communities, and then just truly understand all the rules, all the regulations, all the expectations. And anytime that they come in to want to do an audit, provide full support to it. Don't push back on it. They've given you the money for a reason. Just make sure that your program is managed well, and that the audits then can be completed, and the project can move forward.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Anthony. We're really very fortunate to have you as part of our team.
Thank you.
I think that was a terrific conversation with Anthony, and clearly he's very optimistic about the energy sector. And I think that what the federal government is doing with these GRIP programs is nothing short of groundbreaking. Fostering these kind of partnerships across all these resources in our economy, and presenting grants to for-profit companies is just it's very far from business as usual for the government. And I think that you can be part of this undertaking, part of the solution, if you will, really is exciting and should be rewarding for you. And when I worked at the state of New Jersey, I helped to manage one of the FEMA grants to elevate homes in areas that repeatedly flooded. And FEMA had figured out that for every $1 it spent elevating these properties, it saved $6 in insurance payouts to those properties. And I was encouraged at the time to see the government being proactive rather than just reactive. It was really, really quite refreshing. And I think that the GRIP programs are evidence of that on a much broader scale. So in terms of today's agenda, following Anthony's comments, we'll touch on the GRIP programs. And GRIP is the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships. And as I noted, the second tranche of funding for the GRIP programs is opening up now. And since we've had 58 projects awarded so far, we can get a good idea of what the DOE is looking for with respect to eligible projects. And obviously, if you are a utility or even an energy company, you're pretty much used to regulations, government regulations, but probably not the regulations that come with federal grants. So we'll talk about the federal regulations that you'll need to comply with, what happens when you don't, and in the extreme, the government could require the return of the funds, which is certainly something that no recipient wants. And again, we'll be talking about some of the common pitfalls. So the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act appropriated $10.5 billion for the GRIP programs. 3 in total, as shown on this slide. $5 billion is allocated for the Grid Innovation Program, $2.5 billion for the Grid Resilience Utility and Industry grants, and then $3 billion for the Smart Grid grants. The goals of the GRIP program, first of all, is to transform the U.S. grid at the transmission and distribution levels for greater resiliency in the face of extreme disruptions. Another goal was to prioritize energy justice. In other words, to substantially benefit disadvantaged communities. And this ties in with the administration's Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of overall benefits should accrue to disadvantaged communities, or the acronym is DAC, D-A-C. And as we see over and over, the DACs are the most negatively affected by natural disasters, and in many cases lack the best energy resources to begin with. And then the third goal for the GRIP programs is to leverage private sector and non-federal capital for impactful technology and infrastructure deployment. So these tend to be huge infrastructure projects and obviously quite capital intensive. But I think more than that, the government is trying to leverage ideas. The latest reading, the government spent 0.8% of GDP on research and development. So it is not trying to be the hub of innovation. That is certainly why it is looking into the private sector. Plus, I think the government has the recognition that this is just too big an issue for one sector alone to address. Climate change has to be addressed by a collaboration across our economic sector of government, whether it's federal, state, or local, or Indian tribal nations. It's for-profits, it's not-for-profits, and it's institutions of higher education. There has to be a collaborative effort. And the priority projects, according to the DOE, are those that will generate the greatest community benefit in reducing the likelihood and consequences of disruptive events. Every GRIP award so far, all 58, included a community benefits plan, and 3/4 of the projects included union labor agreements. And you will also see, as basically a requirement for eligibility is the creation of good jobs, high quality jobs. So if we look as the first category, the utility and industry grants, who's eligible for these grants? Well, electric grid operators, storage operators, generators, transmission and distribution providers. And generally, these eligible entities that are for-profit. The legislation, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, also set aside 30% of the total funding for this grant for small utilities. Small utility defined as one that produces less than 4 million megawatts of electricity per year. And in this next round of projects, the DOE has expressed that it wants to see more small utilities and cooperatives partnering with technology or for-profit entities applying for larger projects across multiple service territories. As Anthony was saying, the DOE wants these funding to translate across territories. So the utility and industry grants are awarded to supplement existing hardening efforts planned by the company. In other words, not to fund brand new ideas, brand new initiatives. There has to be a show of faith and I think probably a risk limiting factor in that the company has to already have started some hardening efforts or at least have planned those. And the emphasis on this particular category of grants is preventing or mitigating the effects of natural disasters that are caused by climate change. And in 2021, there were 20 separate billion-dollar disasters. So $20 billion disasters in 2021, which was second only to the prior year, when there were $22 billion disasters. And when you think of the cost in terms of people, of natural resources, and dollars, we really have to come to a way to mitigate this problem. Specifically, the grants were awarded to reduce the risk of any power lines causing a wildfire. And of course, this, recent events, when we look in Hawaii at the tragedy in Maui, was kind of resonated also with one of the grant awards, which was to the Kit Carson Electric Cooperative that received $15.4 million for the project named Building a Modern, Intelligent, Distributed Battery Energy Storage System. Battery Energy Storage System, BESS, and this is for resiliency in northern New Mexico. And given its location in northern New Mexico, the cooperative is especially vulnerable to the impacts of power outages from the threat of extreme drought, wildfire, and high wind events. And truly, the combination of drought, wildfire, and high wind events is disastrous. So the cooperative will deploy the BESS, battery energy storage systems, along with microgrids to disadvantaged communities in 3 locations. So in this way, the cooperative can perform the power safety shutoffs, right, or deactivate active lines if there is a wind event, so that they don't have a utility ignited wildfire on their hands, but at the same time, they can maintain critical loads, so maintain those services locally, and enable those vulnerable communities essentially to island, because they'll have their own stored power in the battery system, and they have the microgrid. So in addition to potentially saving lives, this project seeks to protect natural resources and the tribal and cultural resources in northern New Mexico from a utility-ignited wildfire. And also, the utility grants are being given to increase the company's ability to reduce the likelihood and the consequences of disruptive events. So looking at the second category, the Grid Innovation Program, which consists of some huge projects, because the goal here is to provide financial assistance to foster collaboration between states and electric sector owners and operators for innovative projects designed to harden and enhance grid resilience and reliability. So this category of grants is less exclusively associated with natural disasters. The theme for all of the GRIP is hardening the grid resilience and reliability. And in these types of projects, we're starting to get into the clean energy space, greater energy efficiency at the transmission and delivery stages. And DOE wants projects that will help to ease our dependency on fossil fuels. And you've heard over the last few days with the climate change conference about the pledge around the globe, really, to use more renewables and again, lessen our dependency on fossil fuels. So who's eligible for these grants? As you would imagine, a state, multiple cooperating states, Indian tribes, local governments, or public utility commissions. So the idea is that you have these government-related type entities that apply for grants and will be cooperating with for-profit entities. And again, a huge project that was just awarded one of the Grid Innovation grants is the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, which is in Oregon, and Portland General Electric, to connect PGE's load centers to the west of the Cascade Mountain Range to the huge reservoir of renewable generation resources that are east of the Cascade Mountain Range, including on the Warm Springs Reservation. And this project received the maximum $250 million federal grant. The western area of Oregon is far more populous, near the Pacific, than the eastern half of the state, and includes 2/3 of Oregon's commercial activity, the entire state's activity. So it really doesn't have the large land sites that you need to support the development of carbon-free solar resources. But by connecting to the other side of the Cascades, this connection will increase the reliability of power for the state. So increase transmission of that power of clean energy from the east side of Oregon. And the ownership in the transmission capacity will increase tribal revenues in what is considered a disadvantaged community. And in fact, the tribal nations are, by definition, in these programs, considered disadvantaged communities. So these grants are awarded for capacity enhancements to the transmission system, advanced distribution of grid assets and functionality, and for combined systems demonstrating new or innovative approaches to energy transmission, storage, and deployment. And I think that Warm Springs example, along with Portland General Electric, really fits into this category. So the last category we'll talk about are the smart grid grants. And this is by far the broadest category of eligible activities. And in fact, the program expands on a matching grant program that was established under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. If you recall the acronym ARRA, back from 2009. And the technologies funded by this program must demonstrate a pathway to wider distribution. So this is learning lessons and then distributing that lesson for the benefits of greater territories. And who's eligible? Well, not only is this the greatest variety of projects, but it's the broadest category of eligible entities, because this includes for-profit entities, nonprofit, institutions of higher education, state and local governments, and Indian tribal nations. All can apply for these grants. The grants intend to fund the development of technologies to increase the flexibility, efficiency, and reliability of the electric power system. So this is a general enhancement of power, the power grid. They're awarded to increase the capacity of transmission systems, again, to prevent faults that may lead to wildfires or other system disturbances, to integrate renewable energy at the transmission and distribution levels, such as the Warm Springs project, and even to facilitate the integration of electric vehicles, green buildings, and other grid edge devices. So those are the three categories of the GRIP programs. And for the remainder of this presentation, let's address the regulatory environment that accompanies federal grants. And you can see on this slide the two main sets of rules, 2 CFR 910, the supplemental guidance, and 2 CFR 200, which is the uniform guidance. And CFR means the Code of Federal Regulations. So 2 CFR 910, 2 CFR 200 are where you could locate these two sets of rules within the overall federal regulations. So the uniform guidance is formally called the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards, which is a mouthful, and which is why we call it the uniform guidance. So you may be asking, what does uniform guidance mean, and why do I care? And as you can see on the slide here, that whether you are receiving a grant or you're administering a grant as a state, for example, the uniform guidance governs all grant awards. And as a colleague of mine used to say, free money comes with baggage. And the baggage in this case is the uniform guidance and 2 CFR 910, which I call the supplemental guidance. And because the federal government does not normally give money to for-profit companies, it contracts with for-profit companies and it pays them, yes, but grants, no. Another set of rules have to be assembled to supplement the uniform guidance to address the more unique issues that grants to for-profit entities would create. And in fact, the definition of a non-federal entity in the uniform guidance, so non-federal entities being those receiving grants or administering grants, it doesn't even mention for-profit entities. That wasn't even envisioned at that point. So the Department of Energy had to adopt this 2 CFR 910 to supplement the uniform guidance. So the supplemental guidance basically adopts the uniform guidance, but you'll see that it actually substitutes certain provisions of the uniform guidance where necessary. So these are some of the main requirements that I will discuss more specifically relating to compliance, either because they're very important or they're easy to get wrong. So that's procurement, cost principles, intellectual property, compliance audits, and monitoring. And procurement is the most common area in which we find compliance mistakes. Now, I had worked with the state of New Jersey with the ARP funds, American Rescue Plan funds. We received $6.2 billion at the state. And from my experience, if you are not used to receiving federal grants, this is the easiest misstep that you can make. And despite what you would normally do, if you are procuring with federal money, even if it's in part, even if you're taking federal funds and combining them with state funds or private funds, you still must follow federal procurement regulations. The non-federal entity must have and use documented in bold procurement procedures. And those procurement procedures must specifically address steps that you are taking to avoid a conflict of interest or even the appearance of such. Now, the reason we boldened document is that in the world of federal grants, if it is not documented, it does not exist. And if you take one thing away from this presentation, please let it be, in the world of federal grants, if it is not documented, it does not exist. If you retain nothing other than that, your time will have been well spent today. Now, the conflict of interest, notably, is even the appearance of a conflict of interest must be avoided. And we had a situation with the ARPA grants, a direct beneficiary received funding and had conducted a procurement for that fund, for those funds. And it came to light as the intent to award letter was about to be mailed out that one of the members of the evaluation committee's father-in-law worked for the company that was the intended awardee. Now, he wasn't in the C-suite. There was no suggestion that there was a great pecuniary benefit there. Nonetheless, that procurement had to be thrown out because there was very definitely an appearance of a conflict of interest. And it was a shame because the intended awardee, all the committee agreed was absolutely the best of the proposals. Procurements must be conducted in a manner providing full and open competition. So if you receive an award, don't pick up the phone and call your favorite vendor and say, come on over, let's get a schedule together and get started. You must post your procurement publicly. Now, a way to do this is to post your RFP or your RFQ on your web page and then send out an FYI to your favorite vendor. Say, here, we just posted this opportunity. You may be interested. Here's the link. An example of that with, again, the ARPA funds was ARPA funds were allocated to a huge capital project, and the capital project was already underway. So we're talking to our liaison and at the beneficiary, and they were talking about the construction management firm who would then be doing some hiring with the grant. So we said, well, how did you hire the construction management firm? And they said, oh, well, we had a pre-qualified pool of vendors and did essentially a mini bid. So we said, okay, so what were the qualities for the pre-qualified pool? What pre-qualified with respect to what? And they said, well, we know the best contractors, in this part of New Jersey. So we just invited them to join this pool. And we said, sorry, you cannot use these funds for contracting that has not been full and openly bid. So when I left the firm, there was still a lot of discussion about, or the state rather, there was still a lot of discussion about cash is fungible. Can we use these monies for another part of this project? Because you just could not use them for contractors that had not been selected with full and open competition. So if you get this wrong, you may have to rebid the procurement, or worse, you may have to return the funds to the Department of Energy. So an issue that I think would fall under the conflict of interest category is that the contractors who develop or draft specifications, requirements, statements of work, engineering specs, or if they help you to get together your bid or rather your RFP, you cannot then have that contractor competing for the actual contract. And we had a situation, this was with the Sandy Recovery Funds, a situation in one of the Jersey Shore towns where the town had, I guess it was an engineering firm come in and draw up engineering specs for a water project. And then the firm, after the RFP was issued, competed for the actual RFP, competed for the contracts. And to add insult to injury, they were the sole bidder. So they were awarded the funding. And when we saw this, we said, this is just a flagrant violation of the uniform guidance. And to make a long story short, this all went up the chain and HUD demanded the money back. They demanded the grant funds back. So the town had to repay HUD. And at the same time, the contractor had done work. So they had to pay the contractor. So, an outcome that you most definitely want to avoid. So again, make sure you follow these procurement rules. And actually, one more point on this, when you've conducted your procurement according to the federal guidelines and you've got your contractor selected, when you're drafting the new contract, if you're using a federal award, you have to include the contract provisions that are found in Appendix 2 of the Uniform Guidance. So it's all out, it's right there, you can just incorporate it. And the kind of provisions it includes are the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. If you've done any work with the government, you know Davis-Bacon prevailing wage is required, debarment suspension provisions, and a specific, well-defined penalty for breach of contract terms, which you probably have included in your contracts right now anyway. Cost principles. For-profit companies receiving GRIP funds must comply with the cost principles contained in 48 CFR 31.2, which is contracts with commercial organizations. The cost principles that are included in the Uniform Guidance did not treat costs like independent research and development, or the costs of manufacturing and production, for example. Because remember, the Uniform Guidance was not drafted for for-profit entities. So the cost principles and the contracts with commercial organizations apply. In both cases, whether it's the Uniform Guidance or it's the contracts with commercial organizations, in both cases, costs must be reasonable, subject to the prudent person, necessary, and allocable. In other words, the costs must pertain to the activities that the grant is funding, and they must comply with GAAP standards. With respect to intellectual property, if the for-profit recipient is not a small business and receives an award or a subaward for research, development, and demonstration activities, then the DOE owns the patent rights to inventions made under the award. It is the DOE who owns the patent rights. So an important consideration as you look toward the next tranche of funding and perhaps submitting a concept paper. And compliance audit. For-profit companies that expend $750,000 or more of federal funds, in other words, receive federal funds and then expend those, in a fiscal year, must undergo a compliance audit. And this is pretty much analogous to the Uniform Guidance, which says that non-federal entities that receive and spend $750,000 or more must undergo a single audit, which emphasizes the financial aspects of compliance. But as a for-profit entity, whereas you're required to present your financial statements if you have them in a compliance audit, and of course, the assumption is that you do have financial statements because you have to show your owners an income statement and cash flow statements, and you have to file taxes. But what you do not routinely do is comply with the Uniform Guidance or the Supplemental Guidance. Hence, there's a compliance audit. And you are required, as a company that receives federal funds, to be able to demonstrate both fiscal and legal compliance, and further, that program performance goals are being achieved. In other words, you can follow the federal procedures with respect to your procurement. You're only submitting costs for reimbursement that are allowable. But in addition, what's happening to this funding? Are you actually accomplishing what you're supposed to with this program? You're hitting your milestones? Are you achieving your metrics? So monitoring is more than just auditing, in the sense that auditing includes financials, but monitoring includes compliance, more of a legal regulatory aspect, and it's really more programmatic or more operational. What are your procedures? If you receive funding directly from the federal government, you're a recipient. If you receive funding, though, say through the Grid Innovation Project, if you receive funding from, say, a state, you are called a subrecipient. And the state, in our example, would be the pass-through entity. You are required as a subrecipient to be monitored by the pass-through entity that is actually dispersing the funds to you. So what does subrecipient monitoring include? Well, reviewing financial and performance reports. Again, it's not just financial. It is also, you'll also see a monitor looking for those documented procedures and policies. And also, the monitor must make sure that if there is any kind of finding outstanding, if the subrecipient has to take any kind of corrective action on any deficiencies that pertain to the federal award, this is the kind of thing that the monitor also will be looking for. So remember, auditing and monitoring are not the same thing. We talked about this, and conducting an audit does not satisfy the requirement to conduct monitoring, and vice versa. Right? If you monitor, that doesn't qualify the requirement that you audit. So I always show this slide at the end of a presentation like this, because if you're feeling this way right now, like the person in this slide, overwhelmed, monitoring and compliance is our business at Vander Weele Group, and we would be happy to discuss our services with you. We are a woman-owned business that is headquartered in Chicago. We have a team of experts that we work with, like Anthony Hurley. We have a former regulator, transmission specialists. So we have a pretty good bench here. I would be happy at any time to take any questions from you about today's presentation, or anything about the GRIP or any of these Bipartisan Infrastructure Act programs. And you can see Elizabeth at vanderweelegroup.com is how you can reach me, or the general Vander Weele info at vanderweelegroup.com is a place you reach out if you had more interest in hearing about our services. And again, you can always run that by me as well. I'm, again, happy to answer your questions at absolutely no cost to you. And we would also be happy to enter into a consultation with you for, again, at no charge to you, free consultation. So thank you so much for your time today and your attention. And thank you again so much to Anthony Hurley, our utility subject matter expert. And again, this is really a big deal. This is groundbreaking. And we hope that you are excited to be part of this, whether you've received an award or you're in the process of getting your concept paper together. Hope that you were excited. We're excited about this, this initiative.